It must have been good to get back home, but what a dramatic revisitation. Tell me, what impressed you most about the revolution?
This flag.
A flag?
Yeah.
Why a flag?
Because I learned that the flag is not a simply piece of cloth. It is a symbol held dear, like an icon or a mother's picture or that of a beloved child.
I think I understand the illusion you're creating.
No, it's not an illusion. For a banner like this one, the blood of hundreds of small children was spilled. This flag is a symbol of liberty.
Tell me about the revolution.
There is so much to be shared. Where do I start?
Let's start where all good things start, at the beginning.
Libertate, România, ole, ole!
Liberty is more precious than life. The fear in our bones is no longer like frozen ice. That has caused us to kneel in shame and cowardice. The end of the road beckons with the promise of freedom. Terrorists, bloodthirsty and armed, attack us. We don't have rifles, we don't have bullets, but no matter. We have passion for the victory of our time. We have candles for our dead, our heroes. Come all with your banners. Come all so we could wipe out the dark fog and liberate the morning. Timișoara, 10 centuries of civilization, superb city in Romania. Seemingly invincible, the iceberg of communism shatters into thousands of shards of ice, and hope glistens in the eyes of millions. On December 15th, the militia tries to arrest the Protestant pastor Laszlo Tokes, long an advocate for democracy.
Iar pe acest pod trecea un detașament uriaș de milițieni înarmați cu scuturi, cu ciomege și cu căști ca să atace demonstranțe de aici, de la Piața Maria, unde se adunaseră în fața casei pastorului Tokes Laszlo ca să-l apere.
By evening on December 16th, the crowd has grown, and a teenager jumps onto a streetcar and cries out, "Our moment of liberty has arrived. I'm not afraid of the Securitate." In this moment, the myth of the Securitate begins to dissipate, and with it, the regime. Tens of thousands of young people and adolescents respond to the call for freedom.
Și trebuie să recunoaștem că demnitatea acestui popor ne-au dat-o tinerii. Acești tineri care au avut curajul să meargă în fața asasinilor și Chilul să spune, trage!
This is how the spark is ignited, the spark that had been long awaited by the simmering passions of the people. Timișoara today, tomorrow, the entire country. The ancient city of Sibiu on this 21st day of December is like an arched bow ready to spring the arrow of revolution. News of the massacre in Timișoara arrives on airwaves of foreign radio, like Free Europe and Voice of America. Like a slave driver with a whip, Ceausescu's spoiled son lords over the city. Nicu sends approximately 60 of his boys to take care of the troublesome hooligans in Timișoara.
Și a trimis ca ajutor 60 de teroriști, antiteroriști, cum le spunea el.
A de polițiști, a trimis de securiști.
Grupa specială.
In Sibiu, even children abound in the streets. And the arrests begin. Securitate officials try to push a child into a car, and his mother struggles to protect him. a mother and son in danger.
Cam aici a fost locul în care s-a întâmplat, în care a fost răsturnată acea mașină de teren, acel ar, care după câteva minute i s-a dat foc. Astea au fost, ca să mă exprim metaforic, primele flăcări ale Revoluției din Sibiu.
And so the massacre begins in Sibiu as the Securitate shoots through the eyes of Sibiu.
Ce s-a întâmplat? Ulterior s-a demonstrat că în aceste în poduri, securitatea luase deja poziție cu mult timp în urmă.
They shoot from everywhere. From the militia building, from the Securitate headquarters, from the streets, and even from the cemeteries.
Nici nu putea să ieșueze mai bine securitatea, că a avut totdeauna o reputație sinistră decât în cimitir.
Who is at fault for this massacre? Sibiu, unafraid, responds with courage. The army, too, rallies for the revolutionaries. Who is guilty for this disaster? Yet look, Sibiu is alongside Timișoara also.
Așteptați, până nu se facă nimic, vă rog să-i păziți, da? Până nu se constată despre ce vorba. Nu sunt oameni! Domnule, lăsiți! Nu sunt oameni! Cum dau uitați?
On Thursday, December 21st, Brashov seems to be sleeping under a powdery, chilly mist. There are but a few passers-by, hiding their faces in scarves and speaking in whispers. November 15th, 1987 was a prophetic day because Ceausescu's revenge in response to an uprising was brutal.
Am considerat, fără niciun fel de influență din altă parte, n-am mai putut să mai suportăm atunci. Ne-am explicat în mod revoluționar contra dictaturii care a fost.
That painful day is remembered by all who live at the foot of Mount Timba.
Ziua de 16, a doua zi după Revoluție, am fost luat de acasă când am venit de la lucru, de 3 inși civili, fost dus la miliție, ținut toată noaptea în picioare acolo. A doua zi s-au pus lanțuri la picioare și am fost duși la București.
Will Brashov let its sister city Timișoara battle alone? Certainly not.
Și șocul mai mare a fost nu pentru ei, ci pentru cei care trebuiau să tragă.
Și au tras.
Da. Au tras. Da.
Și au tras.
Unii dintre ei.
Unii dintre ei au tras.
On the streets, the Securitate's tanks seem to be grazing, a herd of hideous animals out of a horror movie. They're ready to raise the town. Violated, Timișoara begins to reclaim its dead and grieve for its heroes. Believing itself alone in danger, Timișoara prays.
Tatăl nostru care ești în cer, sfințească numele Tău,
Înțelegeți, ieșirea Bucureștiului a fost așteptată mai ceva decât Mesia pentru acest oraș, fiindcă altfel șansa noastră de izbândă începea să devină din ce în ce mai mică.
Și Bucureștiul a ieșit.
A ieșit.
Yet look, this is how Bucharest responds. Armed with flags whose crest of shame is ripped out from its center, the city prepares for battle. Ceausescu's idea to gather the Romanian people in the palace's square is catastrophic. Look at him. After 25 years, he begins to understand how much he is detested. The giant crowd heaves in unrest and indecision. $200,000 people cry out, "Coward, coward." Horrified, he runs. By dusk, all of Bucharest pours out into the streets. Young, innocent children tear out to face the bullets of the Securitate.
Pe 15, 17, 18 ani aici. Ne apărăm noi copiii, ne apărăm părinții. Ei unde stau? Unde stau? Stau la televizor.
When Ceausescu announces the alleged suicide of General Milea, the Minister of Defense accused of insubordination, everyone, from the private to the general, understood who was their enemy. And in that moment, the army, with all their hearts and tanks, throws their support behind the revolutionaries, as one military chief says.
Unitatea specială de luptă antiteroristă s-a raliat din primul moment la apărarea și recucerirea libertății.
By dawn on December 22nd, a major portion of the Securitate and militia troops rallies and comes to the aid of the revolution. No outside help is necessary.
Vedeți cazal general Bușă. Не надо ничего, у нас все в руках, у наших руках. Народные.
Foarte bun.
Добрый день.
Deja s-a rezolvat toate, trebuie, nu avem probleme.
Deserted by their master, Ceausescu's guerrilla units and mercenaries are bewildered. Well armed, their fanatic loyalty knows no bounds.
Dincolo se trăgea noi, iar telefoanele erau aici și noi fugeam către.
Te-am culcați ca să orim la telefon.
Și mergeam la nivelul acestui parapet. Imediat ce săltam capul, ne trezeam cu
rafala.
Da, nu rafala, cu armă cu lunetă.
For the first time in history, Romanians are free to telecast the unfolding revolution. Titi Popescu, a newscaster, appeals desperately for help. The Securitate is at an advantage because they had long ago installed hideouts within the houses around the television and radio broadcast buildings. Surrounded, at the mercy of the nested Securitate, the revolutionaries appeal to the public. And thousands of young people head out to defend not only the stronghold in the broadcast buildings, but the revolution itself. By dawn, Nicu and Zoe are arrested, as well as the principal figures in Ceausescu's cabinet, Tudor Postelnicu, Emil Bobu, and Dumitru Popescu. Ceausescu's oldest son, Valentin, is also taken into custody. Fanatic kamikaze fighters and mercenaries try one last time to penetrate the TV building.
Vorbește. Uite, ai posibilitatea să spui. De ce tragi noi? Ce aveți cu noi? Cine sunteți voi? Și ce căutați aici la noi? Vorbește, mai ai posibilitatea. Uite, spune. Spune ce ai spus fetei astea.
Many innocent victims fall, yet among them, as many Securitate and mercenaries perish. The number of sacrificed lives grows swiftly, and the heroes' ranks multiply. And thus the revolution swallows its children. On Christmas Eve, the heated battles continue in Timișoara.
Noi am aprins făclia, dar puterea a cucerit-o toată țara. Și toată țara a înlăturat dictatura.
The foreign journalists seeking sensationalism were disappointed that the number of mortalities was not as great as had been supposed. Only they believed the rumors that the revolution had been a long strategized plot by Ceausescu's enemies, or that Gorbachev had been a major player. These are untruths and insults directed at a revolution inspired by an innocent, naive youth, one of the most spontaneous uprisings witnessed by a century ravaged by wars and tainted by so many corrupt alliances. This bloody Romanian Christmas will remain in history as an innocent kiss upon the defiled countenance of this century.
Studenții, muncitorii, copiii, pot să spun copii, este, dacă vreți, miracolul acesta este o revoluție a copiilor și a copiilor.
The world has recently witnessed a number of revolutions. In Africa, revolutionaries dance to the rhythms of their drums. In South America, they sing. In Romania, the revolution is poetic. All the slogans and chants are in verse. Different from other revolutions throughout Eastern Europe, the Romanian Revolution springs from the hearts and minds of impatient youngsters. This Romanian youth greatly admires Bush and Gorbachev and agrees that the necessary changes must come about peacefully and without violence. Yet they do not agree with the prolonged period of transition from dictatorship to freedom. They are young, and their life rhythm is more rapid. To them, liberty is like an expensive toy for which many have given their lives. They want their liberty now, completely and immediately. Do they not deserve their freedom? Why should they wait until the old order decides out of goodwill to grant them democracy? They constitute an incredible potential, much more valuable than the older generation of parents, a generation tried and given to compromise, painfully aware of only the day's sustenance, with little planning for the future.
Noi, cei care nu ne-am luptat, ani de zile, zeci de ani, nu ne-am luptat, n-am făcut nimic. Avem acum, cel puțin, datoria sfântă să apărăm drepturile și libertățile pe care acești copii le-au câștigat prin viețile și sângele lor. Jertfa lor ne obligă acum la o schimbare radicală de atitudine, o schimbare a formelor noastre mentale anchilozate.
The youth, educated and intelligent, possesses a unified view of the socio-political changes necessary for their country, a conviction that will serve as a compass for the coming years. Some are young laborers, anxious to learn a trade. Others, speculators on the black market, and now free from the economic limitations imposed by Ceausescu, and may become the backbone and future business people of Romania's economy. These are the faces and personalities that comprise the revolution, and it is they who will carry the country forward. Democracy is as old as ancient Greece, yet the media reminds us often that we still have more to learn. Romanians, too, mastered the principles of democracy, no better or worse than other nations, but a political blackout was imposed at Yalta. As a consequence, Romanians are obligated to hasten their efforts to update their political system and embrace democracy. As in the time of Pericles, hundreds of groups form spontaneously as people gather to discuss democracy. They debate ideas, all very interesting, some impossible to achieve. One might ask, with such a preoccupation with democracy, does anybody in this country work anymore? For the time being, they are nourishing themselves with the long-desired treat of liberty. Soon enough, however, another hunger will set in to gnaw at their stomachs, and they will devote themselves to work with the same passion and success that achieved the revolution. As the burden of communism was carried to a proper end, so will democracy be brought to fruition. And for the consumers, perhaps they shouldn't rush to spend their money, as they undoubtedly will. The first manifestations of democracy are political parties, and Romanians are completely involved in the new parties that spring up like mushrooms after a rainfall. The National Salvation Front is comprised of former members of the regime. Having inherited and idealized communism from their parents, they were uncomfortable with Ceausescu's politics. As a result, First Minister Petre Roman and President Dan Ghitescu had only partial and temporary access to power. So now, the reach for power is desperate. It's now or never.
Vă rog, vă implor, nu este momentul pentru o luptă pentru putere, nu? Cine? Vă rog să facem însă cum au făcut tinerii, acel sacrificiu al vieții lor și noi să sacrificăm această dorință de glorie și de putere.
Through their cunning, NSF members have suggested that their actions in freeing the country from Ceausescu merits them a term in office, and many are persuaded. The front can depend on a strong base of voters, starting with the 3.8 million former party members. Workers of the old bureaucracy will also vote for the front, because in an open market, only the skilled will have secure salaries. Among the many parties, the most important ones for the future are the National Peasant Christian Democratic Party.
În primul rând, partidul nostru nu este un partid de clasă, limitat la clasa țărănească, numai prin numele său.
The National Liberal Party and the Social Democrats. These parties are represented by persons almost no one knows because they were recently released from prison. For example, Corneliu Coposu, head of the National Peasant Party, was a political prisoner for 17 years. Others, political exiles, are just returning from the West. As rumored by adversaries of democracy, these immigrants are returning with money to buy the country.
N-ai voie că dacă ai fugit din țară, să vii înapoi, să fii partid!
What kind of image will these leaders portray when they appear on television? Fresh out of prison, it is obvious that they are confused momentarily by a reality they don't recognize. Nonetheless, it is a world they love with a passion. Perhaps they too are thinking of power and saying to themselves, it's now or never.
Se schimbă din 4 în 4 ani, nu imobilism, fluiditate. Îmbătrânim cu toții, obosim, să vină alții noi.
Who's supporting these leaders? Almost all university and high school students, many of which are under 18 years of age, and essentially the entire intellectual community.
Problema prioritară la noi este decăderea morală care s-a acumulat în acești 50 de ani de dictatură. Pe de o parte. Pe de altă parte, problema pe care o putem noi rezolva în 2-3 ani este asigurarea cu alimente a populației.
A large majority of former Communist Party members who collaborated with the regime only as a necessity to practice their professions will rally their support for these leaders. They can also count on those with an adventurous spirit, those professionals who are confident that their skills are valuable under any political leadership.
Dar înainte de toate, trebuie dat țăranului ceea ce i s-a furat. Pământul în stăpânire veșnică. Cum se organizează în continuare este diferit la loc la loc.
The electoral race for power is close. What role will the younger generation play?
Unde se fac înscrierile pentru cei din București, o să vedeți că peste 80% din coada interminabilă de oameni e formată din tineri. din tineri și foarte tineri.
This electoral battle will remain in history as a pioneering effort for democracy. Difficult, but sublime. If we compare Romania's struggle with the commercialized campaigns in American politics, for example, we take off our hats to the courage of the Romanians. For many years, the television station broadcast only 2 hours per day, and of these 2 hours, Ceausescu appeared on the screen continuously. On December 1st, 1976, Ceausescu required all Romanian foreign correspondents to return from their assignments. Also, it's been several years since the Romanian press agency renewed its subscription to the major international press agencies.
A spune adevărul prin presă, a intervenit direct prin presă, nu s-a putut începând din 1947, de fapt că perioada 45-46 au mai existat.
And so the newspapers, television, theaters, all culture were in the service of communism's lies for almost 50 years. Anecdotes whispered to one another took the place of a free, creative culture. Professional artists were reduced to being merely an outlet for Ceausescu's politics. Most of them performed their duties with disgust and cynical detachment.
Dacă ne întrebați care era condiția noastră, trebuie să vă spunem că era foarte dificilă, pentru că din alb să faci negru, să fii și prost plătit și după aia huiduit pe deasupra și dat afară oricând, nu era o situație foarte comodă.
Those very few who responded with servant-like zeal, like Ceausescu and Barbu, are considered traitors to their profession. The media has assumed the difficult role of stripping the masks of villainy that some politicians wear in the name of public service. Free Europe and Voice of America deserve an honorable mention for the service they performed in place of the shackled Romanian press. Today, Romania's hope and optimism are justified. Television broadcasts dependent upon artisans whose creativity was once stifled are capable of objectivity and professionalism. The written press boasts several high-quality newspapers, like the century-old Sibiu Tribune. In regard to Bucharest's newspaper, Romania Libera, many large cities would be honored to have a publication of such professional quality. To have a clearer image of the Romanian churches, it's important to focus on the distinction between the two major bodies of believers. One church is characterized by Christians dispersed throughout the country.
Biserica e singurul mod în care poporul român a fost menținut în baza lui fundamentală spirituală.
Profoundly dedicated to its people, the church has sacrificed more than 2,000 priests who suffered and died in Ceausescu's prisons. They left their bones behind, but their fighting spirits live on.
Numai între 1958-1964, când eu mi-am făcut cei 6 ani de detenție, din cei 25 la care fusesem condamnat, ne aflam în închisoarea Aiud, numai la Aiud, aproximativ 500 de preoți.
The other church, the official one with pews reserved as protocol, has nourished itself and become profitable from its collaboration with communism. Yet it has benefited no more, no less than individual people cooperating with the regime.
Compromisurile s-au făcut îndeosebi la nivelul ierarhiei superioare, nu în totalitate. Există și excepții.
The most odious and contemptible collaboration with the regime is the infiltration of Securitate members into the Romanian churches outside the country's borders, wearing priests' robes, worshipping marks and not Christ. These imposters watch and report on every action of Romanian church-going immigrants and still stand today behind the altars in America, Canada, and Western Europe. During the last half of the century, Romanian peasants were oppressed as often and as cruelly as the intellectuals. Private agriculture means individual independence, and this prospect is an intolerable offense to a party of the Leninist type.
Cei care nu vroiau sau deveneau recalcitranți la colectivizare, de asemenea erau arestați, judecați și condamnați.
Collective agriculture was established with bullets and prisons and brute force.
11.000 de oameni, 11.000 de țărani au fost băgați în închisoare.
But the peasants have long deserted the fields monopolized by hired workers. Now the field hands are the elderly, children, drafted soldiers and students who are forced to do voluntary labor. Thousands of prisoners were also assigned to hard labor. Today, successful agriculture is the key to plenitude for the Romanians.
Noi vrem să refacem sau să repunem clasa țărănească în drepturile ei firești, adică să fie proprietară a pământului pe care l-a avut.
If the peasants can't be persuaded to return to the towns and their fields, there will be famine in what was once the granary of Europe. Politicians tend to be quite grandiose and generous when discussing liberty and democracy. Yet when the issue of economy is raised, they are full of excuses and empty promises. Economists worldwide realize that if Romania is to belong in the European market, a radical, decisive reversal from the old economic system must occur, a restructuring that will require devotion and sacrifice from the people.
Se poate face cu ușurință.
Nu vor fi șocuri, greutăți mari, ne putem aștepta încă la șomaj, care este o boală generală a lumii capitaliste, și la inflație, bineînțeles. Însă, încet, încet, totul se va rezolva, se va netezi și vom păși pe calea progresului pe care îl merităm din plin.
If Poland, Hungary and West Germany, with their gigantic foreign debts, assume the difficult passage from one economic system to another, there are no reasons why Romania, with no foreign debt, should not do the same.
Noi am întrebuințat termenul de privatizare pe etape. Pe etape. Adică, pentru noi, scopul final este ca economia să fie privatizată.
Democrația fără libertate economică nu există, domnule.
Apoi, vin unii și spun că vor să privatizeze economia națională. Adică cum? Să ia nouă fabricile? Cine să le preia? Care e capital? Unde există capital în țara aceasta? Deci să vină capital străin? Să ne străineze economia națională? Atunci capitulatul a răspuns că frontul pledează, militează pentru ca avuția națională să rămână în mâinile poporului român.
If the West delays sending monetary aid and making investments in Romania, it's not due to the current political instability. Rather, the West lacks initiative because Romanian leaders are not only hesitant, but they are outright opposed to establishing a liberal market. Romania's neighbors are happy. They won't have to worry about any competition. A good portion of Romania's immigrants left during the early years of the communist regime. Waves of brilliant minds from old and young generations escaped. Free from the restrictions in Romania, they all struggled to assure the continuity of an interrupted culture. All immigrants have remained profoundly attached to Romania and its people.
Pentru că toți formăm același popor, fără niciun fel de barieră politică între cei din țară și între cei din străinătate.
As with Polish and Hungarian immigrants, Romanian immigrants could well return with a wealth of opportunities that shouldn't be rejected. Enjoying a stable existence in their new countries, Romanian immigrants still hear the call of patriotism echoing in their hearts. Their enthusiasm is often subdued, however, because they know that behind the honey-coated messages to the world, Romania's reality is poisonous. Immigrants only wish that their exile was no more. About the question of democracy, however, the West need not worry. It is evident Romanians understand that democracy means concessions, compromise, and tolerance. Romania's salvation is with the younger generation, with those who belong to the future. A nation with 2,500 years of existence is capable of knotting the thread of history that was so brutally and viciously severed. Romania, 2,500 years of history. Herodot tells of the Dacian battles led by Darius in 514 BC. Ptolemy reminds us of their battles in 335 BC with Alexander the Great. In 106 AD, Trajanus, with powerful Roman legions, conquers Dacia and establishes a Roman colony. About 2,000 years ago then, through the cohabitation of the Romans and Dacians, the Romanian people are born. During the next 1,000 years, barbaric cavalcades stormed across these regions, yet the people within the walls of Fort Carpat stubbornly refused to be overcome. They wanted to preserve their Romanian identity and language. In the first few centuries, as the waters of change slowly and steadily calmed down, Romania experienced a growing awareness of its identity as a nation. First, the people were united in provinces defined by language differences. In the 17th century, Mihai the Great achieved further unification of the country. In 1859, the process was almost complete, as the many princedoms were united under one king. From 1859 to 1939, the country proved itself to be a well-balanced European state and produced harvests abundant enough to feed the entire continent.
Într-un termen atât de scurt, și mă refer la termenul eliberării de sub turci până la 1938, au avut această capacitate să explodeze în toate la sectoarele gândirii omenești și să ajungă la nivel european.
During this period of expansion between the two world wars, Romania made considerable cultural contributions. Ioan Caragiale, Constantin Brancusi, Tristan Tzara, Sergiu Celibidache, George Enescu, Mircea Eliade, Eugen Ionescu, Aurel Cioran, Mihail Eminescu. The intellectual growth, supported by universities established more than 300 years ago, guaranteed that Romania was never culturally underdeveloped. Beginning in 1939, Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin put incredible pressures upon Romania. In 1940, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact allows the Soviet Union to take the Romanian provinces of Basarabia and Bukovina. 5 million residents are affected. Then Hitler and Mussolini give the northern portion of Transylvania to Hungary. As a result, 1.5 million Romanians become Hungarian residents. Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Poland are occupied in 1939. France is devastated in 1940. In 1941, the Germans crossed Bulgaria's borders and occupied Greece and Yugoslavia. Romania decides to ally itself with Germany against Russia. Their primary goal is to free Basarabia. The war and its consequences are devastating. The sacrifice of human life suffered by the USSR in World War II is compensated at the Yalta Conference. Eastern Europe is offered as redress. In August 1944, Stalin takes Romania as a colony of the Soviet Union. And at this juncture, Romania's King Mihai I breaks alliances with Germany and pledges to fight for democracy. This act hastens the end of the war by at least 8 months, by which time Hitler would have received his first shipment of the atomic bomb. Romania's declaration for democracy does not hinder Stalin from assigning a cadre of communists to educate Romania's leaders and people. Director of the Communist Party Museum, Professor Ardeleanu, observes.
Cred că este greu ca să putem aprecia că Partidul Comunist Român a fost un partid de masă dacă mă gândesc la faptul că în august 1944 Partidul Comunist Român număra circa 1000 de membri. care venea cu lumina de la răsărit. În calul acesta erau Ana Paucăr, în primul rând. De altfel, ea s-a și erijat într-un lider conducător al partidului.
Attempting to camouflage its actions, the Soviet Union names this group the National Democrat Front. In the November 1946 elections, the liberal opposition wins, but the front confiscates the ballots and declares itself as the winner. King Mihai announces his resignation on this gramophone, and from this point on, there are no obstacles to halt the proletarian dictator. Georgiu Dej, chief of the Romanian Communist Party, eliminates any potential adversaries.
Respectiv, în mai 1952, a reușit să înlăture grupul Ana Paucăr, Teohari Georgescu, Vasile Luca. El devine practic suveran și lucrul acesta se va perpetua până la moartea lui în martie 1965.
Then, upon Stalin's advice and Ceausescu's help, Dej undertakes one of the most Sisyphean tasks of the century, building an unnecessary and useless waterway between the Danube River and the Black Sea.
De oameni care au dispărut, care au fost asasinați, practic, în lagărele cumplite, care au fost la Iud, la Pitești. Un mare număr din marile valori ale intelectualității românești și ale oamenilor politici de valoare română au dispărut în acel canal în care au fost obligați să muncească și să trăiască o viață de chin.
Meanwhile, young Ceausescu avidly learns the ropes of dictatorship.
Și cei care nu dădeau la timp sau nu vreau să dea pentru stat, erau arestați, judecați și condamnați.
Many peasants hire themselves out as field hands, while others go searching for food in the cities. Industrialization is done haphazardly, and the economy deteriorates. Gathered around Georgiu Dej's coffin, the macabre dance for power engages feverishly.
Și că Dej insistă asupra acestui lucru, ca Gheorghe Apostol să fie ales ca prim secretar al Comitetului Central.
Maurer, first minister and the only intellectual in the communist leadership, maneuvers to put Ceausescu in power, wanting to use him as a puppet.
Să rămână în continuare prim-ministru.
George Apostol, chosen by Georgiu Dej as his successor, is frustrated and perplexed at the turn of events.
Maurer este principalul vinovat pentru lansarea lui Ceausescu în conducerea partidului.
Who is the new Tsar of Romania? Nicolae Ceausescu was born in 1918 to a peasant family in the town of Tatarai. At 15, he is political student and apprentice to a shoemaker. The next time we see him, Ceausescu is jailed in the Doftana prison.
Meșterul lui, care era unchiul lui, tot cismar, l-a întrebat, dar ce vrei tu să ajungi, Nicule, după ce el chelfănise destul de bine? Și Ceausescu a spus, Stalin al României. Și a ajuns Stalin al României.
During the initial years of the regime, Ceausescu devotes himself to working with the communist youth. He travels to the USSR to study, returns to Romania with the rank of general, and is given command of the Romanian army. Steadily, he climbs the communist ladder and finally becomes the supreme chief of Romania. Uneducated but highly intelligent, Ceausescu forges a mask out of Marxism and uses it to hide his extraordinary cunning and limitless ambition.
Ceausescu era un om brutal, un om impulsiv, un om care era în stare să facă orice pentru a-și menține scaunul.
Ceausescu demonstrates a Machiavellian penchant for secrets, and what matters most to Ceausescu are praise and complete adulation.
El ținea foarte mult la persoana lui. Dacă n-ar fi fost o fotografie în fiecare zi, el
era nefericit.
Elena Ceausescu, born Petrescu, is 1 year her husband's senior and initially makes no waves. She bears 3 children, Nicu, Valentin, and Zoe. Only Nicu displays political ambitions. In 1973, Elena meets Isabella Peron and is profoundly impressed. This meeting arouses a dormant thirst for power in Elena. Mao's widow, maniacally power-hungry, is perhaps another role model for her. Appointing herself as second-in-command, Elena takes over matters of internal affairs. Displaying few feminine tendencies, she nonetheless desires to live luxuriously and be pampered. Extremely aggressive, Ceausescu's wife is quick to make enemies. With a streak of perversity, she busies herself with videotaping sexual affairs and blackmail. Virtually illiterate, she grants herself a doctorate degree in chemistry, and other universities award her with honorary degrees, not knowing she never finished elementary school. Nicu Ceausescu, awaiting to inherit his father's throne, acts as a feudal lord in Sibiu. His ill repute as a womanizer and alcoholic is well known.
Da, probabil tocmai asta, pentru că toată lumea știa că este foarte afemeiat, foarte bețiv și probabil nu trebuia să confirm sau să infirm chestia.
Da, era afemeiat și bețiv așa, în măsura în care se spunea?
Eu zic că totuși era într-o măsură cât de cât omenească.
Somber stories of lovers he has killed or mutilated are common knowledge. His frequent orgies are notorious, and the times he and his cronies destroyed bars and restaurants are countless.
Trebuie să duc pe urmea cealaltă cu mine în mormânt. N-am voie să...
General Pacepa tells of a social function attended by Nicu and other ministers of state. Nicu stood up on the table, urinated on a plate of oysters, and then demanded that everyone should taste the oysters.
Ați auzit de ce povestește Pacepa?
Am auzit și...
De farfoile cu stridii și de toate lucrurile?
Am auzit, dar...
Vi-l imaginați făcând lucrurile astea?
De ce nu?
Nicu's mistresses were manipulated as he pleased. His most celebrated mistress is the gymnast, Nadia Comenici.
Nicu și cu Nadia au fost prieteni de ani de zile.
Dar ce aveau în comun?
Nu aș putea să vă spun. Probabil șprițul la un moment dat.
Together or on their own, the Ceausescus did their best to spread terror. The majority of their followers resembled them in character, uncultured but intelligent, cunning, and cruel.
Oamenii de prim plan erau niște gunoaie, niște oameni care, efectiv, pe unde puseseră pasul, nu făcuseră decât rău.
Kept in an extreme state of terror, everybody knew the Ceausescus were capable of exterminating adversaries without hesitation and with lightning speed. Literally owners of the land and the people, the Ceausescus' wealth is enormous. 9 planes, 3 trains, 39 villas and 21 apartments scattered throughout the world's capitals, and their own personal hospital. This is only a part of their property because more than $1 billion is stashed away in Swiss and Israeli bank accounts.
Mi s-a spus de cineva că în Elveția ar avea conturi deschise.
Yet, despite their riches, the Ceausescus lived with great uncertainty and doubt. Ceausescu would wear one set of sterilized clothes per day, which would be burned immediately after use. His bed sheets, too, were burned every morning. All 3 ate meals especially prepared for them and analyzed by a chemist. This is true paranoia. The entire system of domination is supported by a disciplinary arm within all-encompassing reach, the infamous Securitate. This organization represents the apex of the Ceausescu's lives. Their purpose was to obtain the maximum control through terror with the least amount of horror. The giant shadow of the Securitate loomed ominously, yet like any other shadow, proves to be less frightening in the light. The Securitate is crushed as if it were but a house of cards when that brave youth from Timișoara shouted out for the entire country to hear, "I'm not afraid of the Securitate." In 1945, the group functions as the police of the Romanian Communist Party. During Deja's term, it becomes an exact duplicate of the Soviet KGB. The Securitate, run by Julian Vlad, employed 15,000 officers, 150,000 full-time agents, and an unknown number of informants. The body of the Securitate was divided into 6 departments: for dissidents, for the economic sector, an anti-spy agency, an internal Securitate, Ceausescu's personal bodyguards, and the Inquisitions and Torture Administration. The Securitate was under the command of the Minister of Internal Affairs, but nobody had control of the infernal octopus. Each department watched one another, yet never knew who was watching them. They were but puppets, manipulated by a man who trusted nobody, Nicolae Ceausescu.
Șeful Securității Județului Timiș.
Vreau să vă întreb, în funcția pe care ați avut-o, vă culcați seara liniștit? După o zi de activitate?
Nu.
Și dumneavoastră?
N-am înțeles întrebarea.
După o zi întreagă de activitate specifică funcției pe care ați îndeplinit-o, seara când vă duceați acasă puteați dormi liniștit? Știind că ați făcut să sufere o mulțime de oameni.
Dar nici acum nu înțeleg.
Dumneavoastră ați înțeles, domnul Sima? Dar întrebam pentru cele rele.
Au fost zile când nu am dormit, au fost probleme, au fost zile când am dormit, dar...
Nu se putea împiedica masacrul.
Se putea.
Se putea.
Se putea.
Și de ce
Dumneavoastră ați fi putut să-l împiedicați?
Noi nu.
Care ar fi fost riscul dumneavoastră dacă ați fi încercat să-l împiedicați?
Se împușcă.
Ca pe generalul Milea.
The Minister of Internal Affairs also had authority over the Securitate's combat troops, the border guards, and the militia.
Aș vrea ca și civilii și ceilalți să știe că poliția asta a fost așa și a terfelită, să mă iertați de expresie, a fost hârtie igienică a tuturor, și a partidului, și a altora.
A securității.
Și ce doriți dumneavoastră, orice misiune, neghioabă și orice anchete și mulți cercetați. Au fost cercetați tot în sediul miliției, nu în sediul securității.
Despite the complex structure of control built by Ceausescu, the ultimate paradox is that in the end, the dictator's life was out of control as he watched his dynasty crumbling before him. Cornered and alone, the Ceausescus have no choice but to flee. Yet they are captured, and they will have to answer for their crimes.
Onorată instanță, avem de judecat astăzi pe inculpații Ceausescu Nicolae și Ceausescu Elena, care se fac vinovați de grave crime îndreptate împotriva poporului român.
Even in the 11th hour, the tyrant and his wife are arrogant and incapable of perceiving reality.
Nu răspunde decât în fața mare internațională. Că nu recunosc tribunalul.
Din ordinul cui s-a făcut genocidul de la Timișoara? Cine a dat dispoziții să se tragă în mulțime la Timișoara?
Nu răspund la nicio întrebare.
Nu cunoști. Nu cunoști situația de la București? S-a tras în piața Palatului în mulțime?
Nu s-a tras în piața Palatului nimeni.
Cine sunt acești fanatici? I-a format noi poporul sau dumneata? Cine a plătit? Cine a plătit?
O altă provocare și nu răspund nici întrebare decât în fața mare arenă națională.
Ce-ai cu poporul român? Zi, vorbește, măi, omule. Vorbește, suntem și noi tineri ca tine. Ce ai cu noi?
Pune în cer prejurări, a murit generalul Milea. A fost împușcat de cine? Și de cine?
Da, culpatul spunea că generalul Milea nu a respectat ordinele primite. Care sunt aceste aceste legi. Ce n-a respectat?
Ce n-a respectat? Voi spune în Marea Adunare Națională
Vorbește inculpat.
Nu sunt inculpat, președintele României și voi răspunde în fața Marei Adunări Naționale și a reprezentanților clasei muncitoare. Și cu asta am terminat. Totul minciuni de la un cap până la altul. A celor care au dat lovitura de stat, trădând poporul, mergând la distrugerea independenței României.
Every revolution has a certain measure of idealism and naivete, but no other people expressed such candid desire as did the Romanians. The terror of Ceausescu's regime has finally been eliminated, but has hypocrisy been erased? Will the ideals of this adolescence revolution be honored? Hopefully, yes. But what are the guarantees? There is only one guarantee, as one young person proclaims. If we need to have another revolution, we'll have one. We fought for liberty, not only for ourselves, but for our children and their children. We want them to be happy in a free Romania. And the world wishes them the freedom they deserve.
Video of this program, call 1-800-876-2447 or visit our website at www.chiptaylor.com.